Martin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. Vic. Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on. Just talking a little bit before, I know we're going to have some good conversations. There's some gelling already happening between us, same wavelength. So I'm excited to share all this with the listeners and what you're going to be sharing to help us elevate our life in some way, shape, or form. So thank you for taking the time. One of the things is my listeners already know this. I like to get right into things. So what is your story that led up to what you're doing today?
I would say the story is about a young man, the son of immigrants, who chases the American dream, then finds out there is more to life than meets the eye, and writes a book about it. I would say the subplot is putting skin in the game and learning the hard way and learning about life and business at a high level, race, religion, life and death. It's a good story, fast-paced and a lot of action and adventure.
Now, was it, when you're talking about all this, what was like one of the things in your journey was like a big aha, right? Like something, I come from an immigrant family, and it's one of the things where, I saw the struggles of what they went through, all the hardship that they went through and still do to this day. And it was one of the things where I was like, I'm not going to let that be me. And I chased this dream, right? And then you get there and then it's like, wait a minute. Did you kind of have that experience?
Yes. My parents grew up in Ukraine in the years before and during World War II. And so they lived under Hitler and Stalin. And it doesn't get any worse than that. And I was actually conceived in a displaced persons camp in Austria, where they lived after the war, birthed on U.S. soil. So I grew up in a small town in rural Wisconsin. And there was the worst imaginable in America was better than the best that they had left behind. So that was kind of how I grew up.
Wow. And so did that spark that, that's Stalin and Hitler? Wow, that's hard.
The left and the right. You get both.
And so did that what was that like your thirst to thrive in your own life? What was that something that inspired you in some shape or way or form?
Yeah, and the other strong influence was there was a Jesuit boarding school located on the outskirts of town, and they admitted a handful of town's local residents. And I learned more in high school than I ever did in college. And I learned that I could compete with some very smart kids from all over the country and even other countries. So I got out of that small town the day of my high school graduation. I moved to Chicago, went to school there and in Madison, Wisconsin, and then moved out west to California to make my fortune.
Love that. And when you talk about skin in the game, can you define what skin in the game is, and then we'll go deeper into it?
Yeah, skin in the game in the business sense, it means to risk your time, money, and reputation on a venture, a deal, on your career. And it means having downside risk so that if you don't accomplish your goal, there are consequences. And that, more than anything, gets you up in the morning. And in life, it applies equally to life. It's, again, having stake, having downside risk. And you see it now every day, examples of not having skin in the game are internet trolls who, are anonymous, try to destroy people. There is no risk to them. And it just pervades all aspects of life.
Why do you think people don't put the skin in the game? I remember when I was in chiropractic school, I did some special work. It wasn't through the school; it was outside of it. But I heard this quote, and I loved it. People love to be in the court watching. I'd be in the stands watching the people play the game. And when you say skin in the game, when I heard that, I'm like, those are the people in the court. Those are the people playing the game, while there's people who are in the stands who rather be there, calling the judgment calls, being the trolls, doing those kind of things, right? Sports is a great example of it, because I love when people are like, baseball is something I'm big into, and it's like, oh, look at he struck out again, can't believe it. And I'm like, you know how hard it is to hit a 90+ mile per hour fastball, let alone anything else. I mean, I've went against it. It's hard. But why is it that some people just, and I don't know if I'm starting to see more of it or less of it. I kind of, I'll ask you on that one, but why do people not put their skin in the game? Why don't we see more of that?
I think the natural human tendency is to fear the unknown. And I can't speak for anyone other than myself. I got into commercial real estate. I was first a broker, then an operator, then a developer, doing what I call mega deals, high-rise office buildings, shopping malls, industrial parks. And it was tough in the beginning and tough all along. And I had to take risks and risk a lot to move up. And that kind of a lifestyle isn't for everyone. Human beings are generally nice. They want to avoid conflict. And when you have skin in the game, it's constant conflict and stress. And it's just not the natural human tendency. And I think for some, there's just not the motivation. If they can get by enough without taking any risk, and that's kind of their baseline.
Well, it's like the old adage goes, right? The more risk you take on, the more the reward.
And that's the reality.
And for you, was it, because I know as an entrepreneur mindset individuals, we like, for me, example, I like to, set what my pay is going to be and say, okay, I'm working towards that. And then it's like, okay, what's the next level? Was that something like you kind of went through in that aspect? Like you kept saying, okay, I got here. Great. All right. Now I want to take it to this next level. And how much can I continually expand and grow and evolve in my life?
Yeah, while it was happening, it was more intuitive. It wasn't until later, and when I started to think and write about and organize my thoughts in hindsight, that I saw that success I would define as the setting of specific tangible goals, and which if you achieve, you raise the stakes. And if you don't achieve, you auto-correct, set a new goal, and continue on. So it's sort of a serial sequence of goal setting. But I didn't know it at the time. I was, when I quit my real job, my wife was pregnant. I hated what I did, and I was flat broke. I just said, I'm never going back to that. So
that's a big jump. I mean, what was it that, so, I mean, sometimes I've been there before where, you're just like tired of what is, and you're like, I know, did you have like a feeling inside, like there was something else, like you just like knew that you wanted to, like there was more to what you can achieve or more to life in a sense?
Well, I'd like to say that I had this passion for real estate since I was a young lad, but that's just not true. I knew what I didn't want to do. And I thought, I did have some prior sales experience, so I knew I could sell. I had that confidence. And I said, what are the biggest value assets I could think of? And those were, commercial buildings. And so they must pay the biggest commission. And so that was the nature of the decision. Sometimes it's just necessity. But it wasn't just the lack of money. I worked with decent people. I just hated to be told what to do by someone who, I felt knew less than I did. And I couldn't envision living my life that way. So
kudos for you for going after it. I mean, it's one of those things where you hear often like saying, it's not about knowing what you want to go after, it's knowing what you don't want.
Exactly.
And know what you want, right? I know I've been through that journey multiple times. And so what are some things that, when it comes to skin in the game, I know you said time, money, those kind of things, right? Because that's what you have to like kind of give up a portion. Well, not money. Well, you're making money off skin in the game if it works out. what are some of the lessons that you've learned? Like, what's one of was it always success? Were there some setbacks? Were there some failures? How did you handle those things as you were ambitiously keep going, moving forward?
It wasn't always success. If there are people who experience that, I haven't met them or heard about them yet. The initial problem was just making money. The first year I did it, I was a broker, purely on commission. So life was contingency, and it was a year before I made a dime. Back then, these investment deals, that was kind of the hardest subset of commercial real estate because they took months to put together and close if they closed at all. And so it was very high risk. And so I had, mouths to feed, and I began to accumulate credit cards and would draw one down and get another one to pay it off. And again, this went on for a year. I had probably 12, 15 cards. But I drew inspiration from Reverend Ike. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he was kind of a huckster and prosperity theologian back in the day. And one of his quotes was, if I owe you $1,000 and I can't pay you, I've got a problem. And then he said, if I owe you $1 million and I can't pay you, you got a problem. So there I went.
I like that. But it's a thing, you banked on yourself at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. It's the buck stops with you.
I mean, I know that very well because that's what I did when I started my business. I took $250,000 in debt from just going to school to become a chiropractor. And then my parents didn't have money. So I was like, how am I going to get this started? Ambitious and wanted to get out there. I had a vision of what I wanted to do. And I said, well, if it doesn't work, then I go work for somebody, but I'm not going to go work for somebody first. And I did that. And it was not fun. First couple of years, it was definitely, struggling away, learning a lot. And then, then eventually things start to turn corner and then you're like, okay, I finally got a grasp on this. And then then the risk became a wonderful reward and just working through that. So you gained success in all that. Would you define what does success mean to you first?
Well, as I described earlier, I think success, as most people use the term, means financial or material success of some kind. And since we're living in the material world, one needs to establish goals. And these are tangible and specific. I'm going to start a business and be profitable within 18 months or whatever. And they're measurable. So if you've achieved the goal or how you're doing. Particularly in the world of business, it all comes down to, making money or the promise of money. The problem becomes when you achieve material success, but you're still unhappy, or you're extremely wealthy, and you're an asshole, but you maybe don't care. So the problem becomes, how do you align your core values with your success, kind of as you go along? And this is much easier said than done, because in the moment, trying to put a large deal together, you're not thinking about anything other than closing the deal. The author E.L. Doctorow described writing as driving at night in the fog. You can just see to your headlights and not beyond. But you can still finish your journey. But it's not until you complete it and look back and see all the turns you took that maybe you shouldn't have taken or whatever. So you're in the moment, and your personal life, as in my case, can spiral out of control. Because you're not only focusing, you know how much time it takes to run your own business, no matter what it is. It's all consuming. if you have a family and you have what should be other priorities as well, and those are neglected, or you just make the decision that those are less important, then things can get out of hand pretty quickly.
When we look at then with your book, The Other Side of Success, what's that?
It's it's obviously the flip side of the coin is what's the human cost to achieve these goals. And in my case, it was a lifetime of finding out the hard way, and through direct visceral experience, and also at times educating myself. But that's the greater adventure. And when I work with people, particularly younger people, and they want to know the 7 secrets, the 5 habits, or whatever, I said, look, if there was a secret, Goldman Sachs would have put a syndicate together and bought a long time ago. So you can kind of forget that. But I asked them, what is it that you believe to be true from the top down? If you believe that life starts at 0 and ends at 0, then that's fine. And you're going to live your life in a certain way. And what you do in business or in any endeavor should align with that. And it's the misalignment that, makes you unhappy. But if you believe there's more to life than meets the eye, and you develop core values, then you need to live according to those to be true to yourself. If you don't, there's a misalignment and you're unhappy. That's kind of my take on it.
I like it. It creates incongruencies, right? If you have core values, but then your actions are going actually against those core values, you create that incongruency in life, and then it makes it, I would say it would make it harder for you to get to where you want to get to.
Well, yeah, you can still get, again, to the material goal of success, financial, high net worth, the toys, whatever, but you're not going to be, quote, happy. So, and you can accept that as your life. And most people do.
And I find that interesting. I think there's at least in the groups that the networks that I'm a part of, the shift has been from financial wealth, and it's some of my coaching that I do too. When I work with entrepreneurs and chiropractors, it's all about, this is great. We'll help you financially, but we're looking at totality of your life, right? The whole being, because we're not here just to, show how much money we make and the toys we have. I mean, that's nice. It's not a bad thing to have nice things, but it's one of those things where there's a deeper meaning. There's a deeper aspect to life. In your book, do you dive into those kind of concepts? I know we're talking a little about it now, but I know you mentioned like relationships and stuff like that. Is that discussed in your book?
Yeah, the book, before I wrote it, I had done some other writing. I dropped out of the business in 2012 and didn't know what I was going to do. And so I started working on some personal non-business projects, and then started writing. Did some screenplays, some essays. And then developmental editor I was working with, who got to know me, said, you've had a pretty interesting life, and you've known some characters, and maybe you should write a memoir. And I said, well, that's kind of a narcissistic exercise. And if it was just a pure business bio, I mean, that's been done a lot and done better than I could do. So I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe the real story is not just the business success, where you have a one-dimensional protagonist, no matter who it is, right? They overcome obstacles in the course of business, but you don't hear about, their mistress ruining their marriage or any of that. And you see the business moguls, they maintain a pretty good publicity staff and control the message. So to be that open and honest would be contrary to the best interest in terms of business. So if I said, at this stage, if I can be as truthful as I can and give a raw accounting of my personal life, and the book kind of toggles back and forth, scenes, business scenes in conflict, and then personal, and then maybe that'll give more of a whole integrated message, because I try to compartmentalize my life, but that doesn't really work. You're only one person, with one head and one brain. There may be two sides to the brain, but it's still just you. So that became the book.
I wish more, people would be more authentic in their ways, where you hear, because I get it. There's a business concept. You got to hold that image and keep it to a certain level. But I think there's also a beauty about showing your humanness in that, we make errors, whatever that may be. And that is, we all have faults. We all have weaknesses. There's things that we're always working on, and no one's perfect. And it's one of those things where I think there's a shift in that, where instead of being that clear cut, looking like always being good, and looking like no one, like I always, there's part of some groups I'm a part of, like if it's in investing or if it's in some other arenas, they always show their successes, right? I'm like, where's your failures? Oh no, what do you mean? I don't have many failures. No. You have failures. Where are they? Like, especially if you're investing in stocks or something, there's failures coming out of that one. You can't predict everything to be right. Even Warren Buffett can't do that. So it's like one of those things where showing that humanness, like, well, I make faults, I made mistakes. And I know for me, my biggest massive transformations were having a mentor or a guide who was authentic and said, hey, I don't have it all together. I'm making it up as I go sometimes. And it's not like I'm saying that I'm going to create this and it's going to be successful. I'm creating something and I'm going to mold it as I go and try to get better. And then hopefully it catches, and then I can work off that. It's one of those things.
Exactly. And if you happen to find a mentor who A, has your best interests at heart, and that's not easy, and B, is truly technically proficient in whatever the arena is, it can save you a lot of time. But you're still going to take your knocks.
In life, you just can't avoid those. It's just, no matter what you have, you're going to have to take them regardless.
I think the Buddha and a lot of people since him believe that the default setting for life is suffering. And it's moving away from that, having those occasional moments of quote, happiness, which I believe is not an end, but just, byproduct of a life well lived. So it all depends how you look at life. But I think there's some truth to that.
Well, I think there's always, when it comes to this, I love that quote by Buddha, and it was something that kind of helped me understand that you won't, I tried, my old mentality was I had so much pain in life that I wanted to get away from it and not have it anymore. So I thought once I get to a certain level, that will happen. And then you get there and you're like, it's still here. Maybe it morphed, it changed, it has a different face, but it's there. Like, why? And it's one of those things where, but then I said, okay, well, how can I live with this? If I have to live with it, what can it teach me? Then you just rephrase the question, and all of a sudden it changed my whole entire life in a different way.
It again comes down to what you believe to be true.
Is belief something that dictates your life then?
Yeah, it did, both in sort of the subconscious sense and in the practical sense. I was an altar boy. I grew up Catholic in this little town. I was an altar boy, and then I went to the Jesuit high school. But then I never stopped believing, but I just lost the practice of my faith. Like many people, there wasn't one moment. It was just the gradual drifting away, and that was the secularism, in the past 50 years. And it wasn't until I had some life shockers that got me to reconsider that. And eventually I returned to the practice of my faith many years later. And so that's how I dealt with it.
So when it comes to your life, being a risk taker, right? When we take risks, sometimes the bigger the risk, it is bigger the reward, but it also is bigger the loss too if it doesn't work out. How did you deal with grief and recovery? How did you rebound back when you had a big hit or a big loss, maybe business or personal? How did you handle that?
Well, the business losses. I just dusted myself up, and next deal. I mean, it was there were sleepless nights, and but it was never I can't do this, or it was the personal side that was much more impactful. And the biggest event, my second wife. Uh, she was much like myself. She came from the rural South, and after finishing high school, got on a bus, headed to California, and to do what she had to do. I think young people today don't really understand how. And she didn't have a handheld gadget to give her comfort or to connect her with anyone. So. But to make a long story short, she became my spiritual mentor and moral compass. I got through alcoholism primarily because I did some things as described in the book, and she gave me one more shot, or that was it. And which is when I wouldn't have done if I were in her shoes. And so she was the most impactful person on my life, kind of all around. And then one night, she dropped dead. And there is nothing to prepare one for that experience. There just isn't. So overcoming grief, there were two problems. The first was just making it through the near term, through the memorial service. Then I had thoughts of suicide, and just getting to the point where you're ready to move on. Now, like where life returns to normal, because it never will, but just ready to either move on or not. And then the second is, what's the takeaway, and what permanent changes do you make in your life as a result of what you've learned from this experience? So that was my way of dealing with grief. And I'm pretty self-directed in most things. And I went to, a therapist, and she said, you seem to have things worked out well on your own, keep doing it. I studied death. I did a number of things, but it's individualized. You have to find out what works for you.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's something tough. You have somebody. I mean, I can just imagine, because my wife is she's my backbone, right? And she balances me and keeps me centered, and I could bounce ideas off her. And she's just a great ass. I always tell people, she's the one person I want to make the most proud of every single day. And, it's one of those things where I can only imagine if that happened. You don't know what you'll go through until you're there. Right. And then you
Exactly.
have to, and then from there, it's like you said, you had suicide, you had other things in there. But this is where like life slaps you in the face and like really shakes you up. And it's like, okay, I have to redirect my purpose in life now, because this is what my identity was before. And now I have to make a shift into a whole new one.
People who have experienced extreme loss, or and they can be any age. And I found over the years, from the first time I meet them, just in first 5-10 seconds, I have a sense that they may have gone through something. You're not the same afterwards. It just is what it is.
You said you studied death. I've done my couple of years. I actually did 3 years of studying reading books and so much on death. What's your opinion of death? You don't mind me asking?
Oh, I hate to be repetitive, but it's a function of what you believe to be true. My life experiences and have led me to the point where I believe death is not the end, but another doorway. And that's me. And so if one believes that, then that has a profound impact on how one lives one's life, because you're doing the best you can in the moment, but you're also seeing where the puck is going and have your eye on the next journey or adventure. And so it's like three-dimensional chess.
Like that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I love how you always bring it back to the belief, because, I wrote a book, my first book, and I talk a lot about the power of belief and the constructs of how it gets developed, and then what really belief is. And it's one of those things where, especially in death, right? I had to go through my own journeys understanding that, but I had to. I don't know if you ever heard the phrase: if you lose the fear on death, that's the moment you start living. Right, because it's the number two thing in all of humans, what we fear. It's amazing how public speaking is still number one. I'm like, really, public speaking? You can just go and practice. And I used to not like public speaking. Now I can do it like with no problem. But it's one of those things where I'm like, death, though. No one has ever come. Well, I don't agree with this statement, because everyone's like, no one has ever come back and told us what's on the other side. I'm like, well, there's people who've had near-death experiences, and they tell you some stories. But in the essence of it all, it's like, no one's gotten out of here alive, in other words, physically speaking.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I did Zen meditation. I studied Judaism and its practices, obviously, with the Catholic beliefs were around it. I joined a group called the Ernest Becker Foundation. And this is described in the book. He's not well known, but he won the Pulitzer Prize in 1973 for a book called The Denial of Death. Ironically, it was awarded posthumously because he died at the age of 49 of cancer. So, but he had been in the war. He was with the troops that found the death camps and did all that. He was an atheist and regained this belief later in life. But his was, I think, the best secular explanation of why people do the things they do. And he said, we're born with this problem. He said, we have conscious self-awareness. We know there's a we, and we know there's a they. And then coupled with that, we also know that we have the knowledge of certain death. You put those two together, and that, in his mind, explained a lot of human misery, because then the challenge becomes, well, if you obsess over it, you're going to go crazy. So how do you deal with it? And his theory was that we each create, as individuals and as societies, immortality projects where we project to others or on ourselves ideas and self-beliefs that will last forever. And so we'll conquer our own death by virtue of, believing in these projects. Now, that can be good if your project is to cure cancer, but bad if, you're, Stalin or Hitler. So I supported the organization, and then later sponsored seminars with academics and that. It was interesting.
I like that. I mean, I think there's something that we, and I was raised Roman Italian Catholic. We have very similar backgrounds. I was an altar boy, all that fun stuff. And I read the Bible twice when I was in high school, freshman year and my senior year. And I can't, like, now I'm looking back on, I got to read it again because I forgot a lot of the stories. But one of the things I always was shocked by is, like, because I look at, why does the fear of death exist? So there has to be a programming in a culture, culture belief somewhere. And when you read some, religious texts, it's like, yeah, like in the Catholic, it's like you have one life and only one life, and if you do not act a certain way and get rid of original sin, and Jesus only can save you, you're going to hell. And I was always like, that's scary. Like, I only have this one life to live. That's it. And yet, if I don't do things right, I'm already damned as it is. I came into this world damned, so I'm already an original sinner. So then it's like, I'm already an original sinner. I got the mark, and then I can't clear that off in any way, shape, or form. And I just have to pray to heck to Jesus that day. I have to surrender to God. I'm not worthy unless you accept me, all these things. I was always like, that just doesn't seem right. But it took me years later to where I was in an environment where I can start asking questions without having shame or guilt come back at me, because I was just a curious kid who wanted to understand deeper. Because you say you studied Judaism, right? Is that and some other religions?
Uh-huh.
Did you? Because I've studied Hinduism and Buddhism, and then I started to look at a few different others, and I was like, there's actually some themes here. There's actually some interesting concepts that they talk about. Did you kind of have that epiphany when you were studying other religions?
There was, again, not a moment, because I never really lost my faith. Even when I did nothing and acted contrary to, ethics, or whatever you want to call it, I still believed in a personal God. I still believed in the power of prayer and kind of the core tenets. And I believed in an afterlife. And I had some, not to go too far sideways, but after my wife passed, we had known a psychic medium for probably 5 years before then. And I'm not here to convince your listeners on that whole matter. Suffice it to say, I was a hardened skeptic, and the people I dealt with on deals are ones whose names you see in the paper, and masters of illusion in terms of getting their way. But I came to believe there was just a tiny percentage, sort of an asymmetrical distribution of people who had the ability to access information, very valuable information, in unexplainable ways. And so I took advantage of it. But this intuitive Mary Jo, she was instrumental in helping me, deal with my wife's passing. And I learned that love can survive physical death. So.
Yeah, don't worry. I've talked many times. I talked about it in my book. I've connected with mediums quite some time. It's because it was part of my journey of understanding death and wanting to understand the spiritual world as much as I possibly could, so that I can understand then my more purpose here. Like, okay, this is what I'm here for now. Here's what my soul needs. Here's what this is here. Now I can go ahead and be able to be like, all right, I'm going to make the best out of this because I know there's a party waiting for me.
Yeah, it's you never get to a point where, okay, now I know it. There's always doubt and questioning. That's part of the thing, but it's where it's kind of becomes binary, where what basket you put your eggs in. You put them in religion and spirituality, and believe that's where core values are shaped. But these are all when it becomes institutional, they're institutions of human beings who screw up a lot, if not most of the time. Or do you put it in the basket of secular humanism, for lack of a better word, where there's always the promise of the perfect utopia, but never seems to occur. And when push comes to shove, when you look at history, particularly the 20th century and the totalitarian atheistic regimes and where that goes. Then it becomes like, I think, like Winston Churchill's comments on democracies. He said it's the worst of all possible systems, except for all the others. So
until we can lose that interest, right? Everything's always driven by interest, and rather than leading to serving the whole or the masses, that's where, because in my world in health, I see it all the time. There's so many things out there that exist that mainstream media doesn't even touch or want to talk about, and all these things. And I'm like, but these can help so many people. It's not like it's crazy or out there, but it's just understanding certain things. And if we can just work at that level, it changes the game. But there's special interest out there, specifically certain corporations that control the information and say, we're not going to let that out no matter what happens, right? Because it hurts their bottom line. I think that inhibits some of it. And I've seen that in a lot of different other industries.
Yeah, and it's really become pervasive just really in the last few years. I mean, and in everyday life. And you have your average family, right? And they send their kids to school. And then the kids come home and tell them what they've been taught. And they say, oh, that's just patently untrue. It's factually untrue. And the kid starts crying, and oh, the teacher told me. But it isn't. But then they say, well, it's maybe not that big of a deal. And they don't say anything. And this is about most things now you see where people have been quiet and they haven't said anything. Let them have this and maybe it'll go away. But it doesn't, because they don't understand what's going on. And then eventually it's like, oh, this is awful. How do we get here? Well, you need to say something and put skin in the game. By saying something, you have the risk of being ostracized or chastised or whatever, sometimes even lose your job. But that's skin in the game. If you say nothing, we know what happens because I've studied this and my parents' experience. And it's not fiction. That's factual. That's what happens. So
I have one question, and you can say, I don't want to answer this, or you do. Do you feel like where we are now in the world with everything going on, is it a resemblance of what was going on back then? Because there's a lot of people that say that.
As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And yes, when you see the language that's being used, if you even took the time to read 2 or 3 history books, which are factually true, you would see the language is from the Soviet playbook. It's the exact language. This isn't something new and exciting, It's just, it's almost unimaginative in its use of language. So
appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, it's something that, another thing too I learned over time is that the ones who write history are always the ones who have won. And so when someone told me that, I was like, all right, I got to go find how I can learn about history that wasn't what I was taught, nor is accepted in the main status quo region, and see if I could find some stuff that will give me more concrete things. And when I started that Pandora box, I was blown away. And it gave me a seeing and understanding. Then I see how everything is, and I'm going, this is how things are going to lead to this. This is where the game's going to go here. And then friends of mine who thought I was crazy, because I'm from the health side of everything, sharing information. I don't hold back. Even my wife's like, you got to tone it down. I'm like, I'm not going to. Like, if I see something that is not truthful in some way, shape, or form, or they're trying to submit, or what's the word I use? Limit people. Yeah, manipulate people in a certain way. I have to speak out. I can't sit here. I don't care if it hurts my business. I've lost patience over this. But I'm like, I don't care, because at the end of the day, I feel better going to bed at night knowing I'm sharing what I know. And it's funny because now a little over a year later, people are coming out going, thank you for sharing what I've seen the people call you names. I've seen trolls come at you. I've seen people say all these things to you, and yet you didn't care. And I was like, because it's not about me at the end of the day. It is not about me at the end of the day. I don't make money off this. I always tell people, like, listen to people who are sharing information that don't make money off the information they're sharing. They're going to be more truthful and honest. They have no agenda behind it.
Well, you're a living example of putting skin in the game. You say what you need to say. It's at the risk, there's downside risk, but it's in alignment with your core values. And there you go.
Well, I appreciate you, brother. Real quick, before we wrap up, tell me if you can share with the listeners how they can find you, your book, and everything that you're up to.
The book is called The Other Side of Success, and the subtitle is Money and Meaning in the Golden State. So it takes place in San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, during the coming of age of technology and all the other things. I have a website. The easiest thing is just go to the website, martinsawa.com, MartinSawa. And there, with one click, you can buy the book in whatever format you want from Amazon or the bookseller of your choice. With another click, you can check me out on social media or listen to some of my archived interviews. And with another click, you scroll to the bottom and can send me an email, and I love to hear from my readers.
Awesome. I'll have that, listeners, all in the show notes. Martin, it was awesome chatting with you. Appreciate you sharing your story and everything, and teaching all of us what skin in the game means and how to go, make, risk versus reward and all that good stuff. I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Vic.